All right, this is the review to accompany uh, the PowerPoint for reviewing for exam three. And so, check your notes, check the introductions to each section, look at your textbook summaries, things like that. I've got about 20 slides to go through here, so let's jump right into it. For the respiratory system, you should be able to identify the general functions. Okay, for that, gas exchange, pH, voice, olfaction, protection against infection. You should be familiar with the structures of the respiratory system and what those structures do. There won't be any diagram. However, there will be questions about structures and particularly the physiology of the system, how air is brought into and out of the lungs, ventilation, how gases are exchanged, um, how those gases are transported, and then how the whole system is regulated. Be clear that you can understand where gas exchange occurs in the alveoli and alveolar ducts, with between the air that's in those areas and between the pulmonary capillaries that are around there. Um, be able to explain gas transport. Of course, the gases move in the uh, across the respiratory membrane by diffusion, but a really crucial thing is that the gases, once they enter the blood, they're converted to something else or bound to hemoglobin so that the concentration of CO2 or oxygen always maintains a concentration gradient. It's really important to know both oxygen and CO2. Hemoglobin and red blood cells play a crucial role. Uh, Hemoglobin reversibly binds oxygen to form oxyhemoglobin, the primary way that's carried. And that that binding, that reversible binding, is affected by things like partial pressure, temperature, pH, the concentration of other chemicals. And hemoglobin also binds CO2, and CO2 is also transported as bicarbonate. A key thing with oxygen is that you have this dissociation curve. That oxygen at concentrations where oxygen is in the lungs, hemoglobin binds to oxygen, nearly 100% of the hemoglobin will be filled. But the conditions in the tissue where there's lower oxygen concentrations, at that oxygen concentration, hemoglobin is going to release oxygen. And that's particularly true when there's exercise and CO2 production going on and low pH. Okay, with the digestive system, again, it's important to be able to identify those functions. And here it was the mechanical breakdown of food, the chemical breakdown using enzymes, absorption of nutrients, elimination and excretion of wastes, and then protection against infection. The digestive tract, all these regions, are all have the same basic structure. They're made out of layers of tissue that include the mucosa, submucosa, muscularis, and serosa. And then it's just differentially developed in each of these regions. Different things occur in different areas. And so the teeth, the oral cavity, you have a lot of mechanical digestion and a little bit of chemical digestion with a couple enzymes. Here, the bolus is formed, and then in the pharynx, it's swallowed, and peristalsis transports it in the esophagus. Then in the stomach, you have mixing of materials in the stomach. The gastric glands secrete juices, including hydrochloric acid and pepsin, and that's mixed to form chyme in the stomach. There are three phases of this: the cephalic, gastric, and intestinal phases. These are parasympathetic impulses and initiate the cephalic phase, and then you have the secretion of hormones by the walls of the stomach and the intestine to control the other things. Most digestion occurs in the small intestine, in the duodenum, where you get a lot of chemical digestion then. And then in the small intestine, you have a lot of absorption um, because you have lots of surface area. Okay. In the large intestine, we have some mechanical movements that are going to mix food and make sure it remains in contact with the mucosa. But mostly here, we're getting ready to eliminate indigestible material and waste. And we're doing it's a site of bacterial breakdown of things that we can't digest. But that produces some vitamins that we can absorb. And then, of course, we're reabsorbing lots of water there. Um, Accessory organs of the digestive system are also important. So the liver produces bile, which has detergents that help make it easier for us to attack the lipids in food. And of course, the pancreas contains a great variety of enzymes and buffers that neutralize stomach acids. In this section, I also talked about some digestive system diseases, particularly a colon cancer. The infectious diseases are important, but colon cancer is one of the major types of cancer. And so here there's some nice illustrations there. Strongly affected by diet, lack of fiber, lots of processed foods, that produces colon cancer. Relatively high fatality rates, a common type of cancer. Then in chapter 24, the key thing is knowing, okay, anabolic and catabolic reactions. These both, use enzymes. In both of them are going to be involved in the production and use of ATP. Okay, we use proteins, carbohydrates, and lipids to produce ATP. We also use ATP to make those things, to make proteins and to make lipids for storage. If we lack oxygen, we can do glycolysis as a source of energy. We take glucose molecules, split them in half to get a little bit of ATP. This occurs in the cytoplasm and it only takes a few steps, so it happens fast. But the waste products are hard to get rid of, and that produces muscle fatigue. If oxygen is available, it's much preferable that we break down carbohydrates, lipids, or proteins in an aerobic manner. This produces a lot more ATP. It has a lot more steps. It happens in the mitochondria. But if we do this at a rate, we can do it continuously. And the waste products are not bad at all, just carbon dioxide and water. When we're talking about lipids, lipid metabolism, and lipids are used for both structure and regulation, but they're also our long-term store of energy that we can easily use. The only bad things about lipid use is that it produces lots of lipids produce these transport molecules that can block our arteries, and then we can produce these ketone bodies that can cause acidosis. Similar story for proteins. We can break down proteins for energy if oxygen is present. This is also going to happen in the mitochondria. We'll use, again, the Krebs cycle and electron transport, just like we did with lipids and carbohydrates. But here we have to strip away nitrogen. And so that generates urea, which is hard on the kidneys and not good for us. And so it's a poor source of energy. And we only do it when we're starving or we're wasting away. So we'd much rather digest proteins and use them as building blocks to make structures that the body needs or regulatory molecules. All right, I hope that helps. And I have another program to talk about the essay questions, so look for that.